Good morning and welcome to the I've forgotten the number, day of evidential hearings. I think it's the 6th. We begin, as always, with the warning that I must give to everybody in the room. You may use any electronic device that you have for telling the outside world what you have heard, but only 10 minutes after the event you're describing. That's to fit in with the means of publication of what is going on, which has a 10-minute delay. You may not use your electronic device for recording or photographing what is going on in this room. Ms. Naylor, I think... oh, I'm so sorry. I do apologise.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this is a summary of the evidence of the officer known to the inquiry as HN33.
Yes.
HN33 served on the SDS between 1983 and 1986. She used the cover name Lee Bonser. There is a restriction order in place preventing the publication of her real name, and she has provided the inquiry with a witness statement. HN33 was deployed primarily to report on the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, but joined a group called Lambeth Women for Peace and reported on that group for around 3 years. Although HN33 was targeted into Greenham Common women, she states that through infiltrating Lambeth Women for Peace, a support group for the peace camp, she was able to report on the camp without living there permanently. HN33 joined Special Branch in the early 1980s. She first remembers hearing about the SDS whilst she was on C Squad. HN33 states that she was working as a plainclothes officer at a CND demonstration when she was asked by a senior officer to approach a group of Greenham women to find out whether they had plans to cause disruption. HN33 engaged with them, and the next day was present when the women conducted a sit-down protest. HN33 called the office to report this. Shortly after this incident, HN33 recalls, quote, "A superintendent, possibly Superintendent Neil, asked to speak to me. At our meeting, he indicated that the Prime Minister wanted to know what the Greenham women were doing, and so he, the superintendent, was asking whether I would be interested in helping the police to find out." HN33 says she quickly agreed to do so. It never occurred to her to say no. HN33 does not recall any formal interview for the role, and there were no visits to her home. She was single at the time, and she thinks that an SDS manager would have spoken to her about the impact of the role, but she cannot remember that conversation. She says that it may have been mentioned to her prior to deployment that living on her own without a partner might have made it difficult for her to switch off after this type of work, and she thinks that there may have been a concern from the SDS managers that she would not have any emotional support at home. But HN33 says it did not occur to her that there was a concern about a single woman being in the role. HN33 recalls that a period of time in the back office was spent getting an officer's legend together. She says she was the only officer waiting to be deployed in the back office whilst she was there, and she remembers being privy to conversations between the other undercover officers at their weekly meetings. She latched onto their accounts, from which she learnt how to be an undercover officer. HN33 has no recollection of having been shown the document Informants Who Take Part in Crime or any tradecraft manual before her deployment. She describes the training as, quote, constant refreshing. Undercover officers would learn from fellow undercover officers and the SDS managers on the job. HN33 does remember having some equal opportunities training on the course she undertook on joining Special Branch, and says that this covered gender equality training and may have covered race equality. HN33 says it was left up to her judgment on how far she was to become involved in the private lives of those she met whilst deployed. She felt it was acceptable to socialise with members of her target group, but not to stay overnight with them. She thought her managers might have been concerned if she was going on holiday with them. She does not think she was given any guidance or instruction on sexual relationships or what to do if you received legally privileged information. HN33 says that the general guidance was to avoid participating in criminal activity and to try not to get arrested. Although she does not remember anyone telling them not to encourage others to participate in crime, HN33 had an understanding that this was not permitted. She does not remember being told what to do if arrested, but thought she should ring a phone number she would have been given. HN33 believed that generally it was understood that if you were arrested, cases would never get as far as court, though she does not recall any specific advice on what would happen if they did come to court, or how they could prevent them from coming to court. HN33 used a deceased child's identity, the name being Catherine Leslie Bonser. The name of the deceased child was found at Somerset House, a process she learnt about whilst in the back office in the months before her deployment. HN33 created a cover background to her assumed identity that she had left an abusive husband, left her friends and family behind, and moved to South London. This explained a lack of friends and family and meant she could avoid any interest in her from her target group. She did not use any features of the individual whose identity she used in her legend, and she did not visit places or people to prepare herself for living in her cover identity. Her cover employment involved working in an estate agent's, which gave her an opportunity to always be away from the office. HN33 had 2 cover accommodations that she organised herself. Neither accommodation was shared. The only other place HN33 stayed whilst undercover was in a tent at Greenham Common on the weekends. HN33 says this was, quote, very rarely, probably only once or twice over my whole deployment. HN33 describes having SDS meetings at the Safe House twice a week on a regular basis, and she described the discussions there as, quote, fairly light-hearted, with little serious stuff discussed as a group. If we did speak about our deployments, generally it was kept quite light, and we did not get into the nitty-gritty, but we might have shared a story from which we could all learn. HN33's life whilst undercover involved attending the twice-weekly SDS meetings, attending meetings or demonstrations 2 or 3 evenings a week, and commonly also attending over the weekend. HN33 says the primary task of undercover officers on the SDS was to identify public order issues and the details of those involved in the groups they infiltrated. Sometimes they were specifically asked to find out more information about certain individuals, but there were no written instructions that she was aware of. It was just verbal instruction given over the telephone when calling the office. HN33 says the members of the group that she went into were, quote, such an unknown to the police that I was expected to find as much information about them as I could, and if they posed a risk to the public order. The tasking came from the SDS back office, either the DS, DI or DCI, who themselves had probably had discussions with someone on C Squad. HN33 also says that, other than fence cutting and entering the base at Greenham Common, sit-down protests at marches and demonstrations, she didn't see any other particular public disorder during her deployment. HN33 says that Lambeth Women for Peace would have regarded her as a member of the group, and to a lesser extent the Greenham Common women would have considered her the same, though there was no formal membership structure in either group. It was the result of her finding an advert and attending a meeting of the Lambeth Women for Peace group that led to her involvement with Greenham Common women. HN33 says she saw the advert in Time Out, or a local paper advertising a meeting for Lambeth Women for Peace, and she recognised the association with Greenham Common women by reference to the Women for Peace meetings. HN33 says of the group, quote, Lambeth Women for Peace were not looking to overthrow the government and so were not subversive. They were against the nuclear bombs and probably would have preferred a Labour government. I had some sympathy for their cause, but they also represented a challenge to public disorder in their numbers and ability to cause disruption. I didn't know much about the group before attending their activities. Their activities were always peaceful, but I did form a view that they may be disruptive to public order, and the members were likely to undertake a sit-in or sit-down protest which could cause disruption. In terms of criminality, aside from the public order element, the only criminality in the group was in their attempts to break into the base at Greenham Common, and she goes on to say that she witnessed members of the group doing so on a number of occasions. The inquiry holds reporting from this officer from June 1983 to November 1986, and HN33 says that this seems to accurately reflect her reporting on the SDS, save for reports on a visit to a submarine base in Scotland and the actions that occurred there, for which the reporting appears to be missing. She also states that there's a gap in the intelligence reports attributed to her between 28th of June 1985 and the 13th of September 1985, and she believes that this may have been the result of her taking a holiday, though this doesn't explain the entirety of the gap. HN33 notes that in some of the intelligence reports, she is listed as an attendee at meetings in her cover name, and in others she is not. HN33 says, quote, "I suspect that the reason I appear as an attendee in some and not others was a ploy to ensure you could not tell who was reporting this information. It was uncommon for the same people to be at all the meetings, so if the reports always listed one person in all of the meetings, someone reading the reports might be able to figure out that I was the source." HN33 says that in relation to her reporting, she reported what she observed, and it was for someone else to filter it and decide its relevance. HN33 says, quote, "I would report most actions, i.e. the group going out to do something. It could be a matter of public order, no matter how small. There may not have been violence, but there may have been disruption, so I reported it for someone else to consider the appropriate police response." The inquiry holds a report dated the 13th of July 1984, which refers to HN33 facilitating a meeting of the Lambeth Women for Peace. HN33 described this as involving trying to ensure everyone at the meeting had a chance to say something. The inquiry holds a report dated the 28th of October 1983, where HN33 provided the bank details of the group Greenham Women Against Crews. She cannot say how she came to obtain the bank details. A second report, dated the 13th of April 1984, describes 3 women, including HN33 and her cover name, as being prominent in the organisation of the London office of the Greenham Common Women. But HN33 suggests that this might have been exaggeration by the back office. She does not think she influenced the actions of the group in that role, but also cannot really remember being in the role. A report dated the 28th of September 1984 named HN33 and her cover name as one of the 7 signatories for a bank account for the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp. HN33 does not recall how or when she came to be a signatory to the bank account, nor whether there was any discussion with the SDS as to whether to become involved in that way. She says it may have been useful intelligence for Special Branch. HN33 regularly reported on individuals, including information such as addresses, telephone numbers, employment, relationship status, and vehicle details. She doesn't know how she obtained details such as telephone numbers and addresses, but says that people would often have given their phone number to her, or have invited her round to their house, and thereby she would obtain the address. HN33 says that the information built a picture about an individual and could enable Special Branch to consider the risks an individual posed or to rule the individual out of their inquiries. There is no evidence that HN33 engaged in any sexual relationships whilst undercover. HN33 says she did not form an especially close bond with any one individual in her target group. HN33 says that the only time she participated in criminal activity during her deployment was on one occasion where she participated in a trespass of the Greenham Common Air Base alongside many others. She did not cut the fence, but she felt it would have been noticed if she had not entered the base when everyone else was doing so. HN33 was never arrested or charged with a criminal offence while serving as an undercover officer, nor was she a witness in any criminal proceedings in her undercover identity. HN33 was involved in a minor road traffic accident, and she exchanged her cover identity and cover address with the other driver. HN33 does not recall being given much information on how to deal with legally privileged material. She does not believe she ever received or became aware of legally privileged information while she deployed. And she says of the intelligence reports she submitted on the solicitor Jane Hickman that it, quote, "never crossed my mind that I might hear information subject to legal privilege." HN33 states that she did not see any subversive activity during her deployment. She thought her reporting would have been provided to the security service, as she understood that that was standard practice for Special Branch material at that time. She would generally provide handwritten reports to the SDS office weekly, though at times there would be multiple reports. Around June 1986, HN33 was redeployed to report on the Socialist Workers' Party. She thinks that Lambeth Women for Peace had started to slow down their activities and some had drifted away, or that the SDS managers had decided the deployment was no longer necessary. She says that the peace movement had changed and was less focused on Greenham Common. She moved to the Socialist Workers' Party, but did not really get close to anyone in that group and was not involved with it long enough to be invited to become a member, only attending a few meetings over the course of a couple of months. Her withdrawal strategy from Lambeth Women for Peace included the scenario that she was leaving the UK to emigrate to Australia. The deployment into the Socialist Workers' Party was brought to a close after a few months, as the SDS management had decided to downsize the squad. HN33 says there was no long-term effect on her or her family's welfare from working on the SDS. She remembers mentoring one officer in the mentoring scheme. She does not think that the Metropolitan Police Service had a great deal of support or welfare services available for undercover officers, but she did not need it, and so she did not seek it out. HN33 says that in the grand scheme of things, she does not think her reporting contributed much to policing, but that what she did provide was useful and allowed good policing of the activities she was involved in. But she does not think that the police could have obtained the information she did without the use of undercover police officers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. I'm sorry not to have recognised that it was you who was going to start. I apologise. May I just add one thing to the very helpful summary that you've read? HN33's reporting, her contemporaneous reporting, shows that she produced regular reports on the plans of London women's peace groups for demonstrations in London, and they were invariably peaceful. I think that's a reasonable summary of that aspect of her reporting.
Yes, sir, I'd agree.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Naylor.
So this is a summary of the evidence of the officer known to the inquiry as HN88. HN88 was deployed between September 1983 and November 1986 into a geographical area, Hackney and Stoke Newington, rather than towards a particular group. There is a restriction order over his real name. His cover identity was that of a deceased child, Timothy Spence. He has provided a witness statement to the inquiry but has declined to give live evidence and cannot be compelled to do so as he lives abroad. HN88 states that he was approached by Bob Potter to join the SDS and was then interviewed by an SDS inspector. He thought it sounded like a thrilling, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he remembers a home visit to him and his wife which provided them with sufficient information about the practical impact of the role. HN88 describes a significant increase in his income whilst on the SDS as a result of overtime. During his time in the back office, HN88 met with current UCOs and received guidance from the SDS managers, but no formal training. He had access to a binder containing guidance on how to research a deceased child's identity, from which HN88 did not feel able to depart. HN88 states he drove around the child's birth town for general knowledge, but did not research or investigate the family. HN88 used a close contact as his girlfriend, which he states provided an excuse not to get involved in a relationship, an explanation for time spent out of the field, and an exit strategy. HN88 took her to his cover accommodation a couple of times, but she was never introduced to his groups. He was given no specific guidance on sexual relationships while deployed, but states it was obvious to him as a police officer that it would be unacceptable. HN88 also states that it was obvious to him that it would not be acceptable to commit criminal offences that were any more serious than fly posting or obstruction. HN88 arranged cover employment as a van driver, and he had a van which he used to drive activists. HN88 understood that he was tasked by DCI Short to report on the Hackney-Stoke Newington area as it was, quote, a hotbed of activity that might lead to public order issues, end quote. If people came onto his radar, they were within the remit of his general tasking, and he was never told to stop or start reporting on any particular group or campaign. HN88 describes Hackney campaign against the police bill was his focus, which was campaigning against the Police and Criminal Evidence Bill, and wider policing issues in Hackney. He would have been seen as a formal member. Many of their public meetings attracted a small number of activists. It later became Hackney Police Monitoring Group, and HN88 was one of 8 active members, but states he only acted as a follower, not a leader. HN88 reported on a number of other police monitoring and anti-racist groups, including the East London Campaign Against the Police Bill, which later became East London Campaign Against Racist Attacks and Police Harassment, the London Campaign Against the Police Bill, and the National Campaign Against the Police Bill. HN88 reported on meetings concerning matters such as police presence in schools, criticism of the police, and mass pickets at courts, police stations, and public houses. On one occasion, he reported a discussion about coordinating attacks on racists. HN88 also reported on speeches made by members of Parliament at events, and details of individuals, including their employment, foreign travel, and on one instance, their sexuality. HN88 began reporting on Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament in February 1984, when he formally joined Hackney CND, and continued until the end of his deployment. HN88 recalls travelling to Greenham Common, possibly for Cruise Watch, and took part in a CND walk around Molesworth RAF base. He became secretary of Hackney CND and a signatory of the Hackney CND bank accounts. HN88 also attended meetings and events of London Region CND as a representative of Hackney CND. He attended and reported on the 1985 CND National Conference. He provided various documents from Trade Union CND and some reports on Hackney Youth CND and Stoke Newington CND, such as their Easter action in March in 1984. HN88 states that he did not consider the groups on which he reported to be subversive. He considered his deployment was public order focused. However, the groups were in fact no great threat to public order. They engaged in minor criminality such as fly posting. He witnessed marches that would not have been notified to the police in advance, obstruction of the highway, and pickets outside police stations. Some groups attracted speakers that advocated direct action, and occasionally there was a risk of confrontation between opposing groups. However, HN88 states this never materialised, and he recalls only shouting and insulting behaviour. HN88 had 3 near compromises during his deployment, but there were no consequences to these incidents. He expects he discussed them with his managers. He was involved in 4 road traffic collisions and on each occasion used his cover name and address. HN88 recalls that on a couple of occasions he was pulled over for driving through a red light or a stop sign and was given a ticket. HN88 maintained his cover and assumes his managers, quote, smoothed over, end quote, the ticket by liaising with the local police station, and no further action was taken. There is no evidence to suggest he had a sexual relationship in his cover identity. He was involved in fly posting and potential obstruction of the highway, but he was never arrested and did not appear in court. HN88 recalls the Commissioner, Sir Kenneth Newman, visiting the SDS premises and congratulating all the UCOs. HN88 considered the informal welfare monitoring whilst in the field was sufficient for him. He did not need to use the very informal welfare support from the SDS office following his withdrawal. However, he does consider that the SDS had a long-term effect on his welfare. For example, in the years after, he found himself lying unnecessarily, and he believes it contributed to his eventual divorce. He comments that seeing how the police treated him whilst in his undercover identity made him rethink his commitment to policing. So that's the summary of HN88.
Thank you very much indeed. We're now going to hear the live evidence of HN65. I think I will rise momentarily to permit him and Mr. Barr, who is going to question him, to come into the hearing room. Before this witness is sworn, those following our proceedings on the live stream will hear only audio broadcasting and not video broadcasting. That is not a mistake, it is a deliberate decision. Yes.
Just repeat the words after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Are you the witness that we know as HN65?
I am, sir.
You've provided 2 witness statements to the inquiry. The first dated the 4th of November 2019, and the second a voluntary statement, the first dated the 1st of March 2023. Are the contents of those 2 witness statements true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Can I start with your service before you joined the SDS? What can you recall being taught by Special Branch about reporting on members of Parliament?
It wasn't clear, but there was an indication that you wouldn't treat them as you would treat anybody else that you were reporting on. You wouldn't automatically put them in reports, and if you did, it would only be if they were taking a leading role in the larger event that you were reporting on. And that as such, there were no record files available on them. So in theory, you weren't keeping records.
Was any guidance given about other elected representatives?
Not that I'm aware of.
You served on C Squad before joining the SDS at some point.
Yes, I did.
When you did so, did you have any role in preparing threat assessments?
No.
Did you know...
Or might I come back indirectly by some reporting I might have done, which finds its way into a threat assessment, yes, but not directly preparing the assessment itself.
Thank you, I understand. Were you able to tell what intelligence was coming to you from the SDS or not?
You had a pretty good idea. It was coming from a secret source.
From the SDS?
I wasn't absolutely 100% sure at the time because we had intelligence coming from other sources, secret sources, and I was probably too junior at that stage to know it, but I was vaguely aware of SDS and that some reports did get into our files.
I don't want you to give any details in answer to this question, but were you in a position to form a view as to how useful SDS intelligence was to C Squad's work at that time?
It was integral, but how useful, I know I couldn't form an opinion.
Whilst working for C Squad, did you form an understanding of what Special Branch was interested in so far as the extreme left wing was concerned?
Yes.
Did that include the campaign for nuclear disarmament?
Not really at the time, because when I was on C Squad, they were not very active. So they hadn't really come into my range of vision.
I think you also worked on C Squad at a stage after you'd served.
That's correct.
In the
yes, I
SDS.
did, yeah.
Was CND of interest to C Squad at that stage?
Probably it was reaching the end of being interesting.
And would Special Branch have regarded CND as extreme left?
I think the view on CND changed as the years passed by. I think initially from the early days, it was considered to be a problem for public order, particularly the Committee of 100. It went through a calmer period, and then with the arrival of cruise missiles, or the imminent arrival of cruise missiles, etc., into the country, it took on more interest again because there was a real concern that there were people who sympathised with CND who might take some active role in preventing or trying to prevent those missiles arriving and being operated within our system, within our country.
And by that stage, you were serving in the SDS?
Yes, yes.
Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. Did you learn whilst in Special Branch before the SDS how to write intelligence reports in the Special Branch House style?
Yes.
And did that style change when you were reporting in the SDS or not?
Not really, no.
You tell us that you came to join the SDS after having been, if I use a colloquialism, tapped up by the officer we know as HN 126. And you've said that he said to you that being married with children, quote, is what brings you home. Could you expand on that, please?
He was referring, I believe, to the selection process, and there was a concern, I believe, that when you're so integrated into your groups that you could go, inverted commas, native. And the idea that you had a family to come back to would be something that would keep your feet firmly on the ground.
Could you help us with what is meant by going native?
That because you lived and socialised with them, that you might perhaps be over-sympathetic and lose your sense of perspective.
Was there any concern that there might be a risk of sexual activity in your undercover identity, and that being married with children might act as a deterrent?
I'm not sure that's why they preferred married people, but yes, it would act as a deterrent.
You told officers from Operation Hearn that you thought it would be exciting to join the SDS. Could you expand a little on why you thought that and what you meant by that?
From when I first joined the police, at the police section house I was at, there were two officers who did early SDS work, and I was absolutely intrigued. Those, at that stage, they were not separated away so much from the police service, so they would actually come back to the section house having done their work. And it fascinated me. I thought, how exciting to actually be doing undercover work. And yes, it was excitement, the potential excitement for it.
Was the SDS seen as something very special?
Yes, it was.
Now, you tell us in your evidence that you were spoken to by DCI Ferguson and DI Butler. When they spoke to you before you joined, did they explore the importance of resilience at all?
Not really, not that I recall. Could you expand on that?
Well, I'm really asking whether they were asking you any questions about how you would cope undercover.
Yes, I suppose they would have. They would have asked that, but more specific, I couldn't be on that.
You tell us that they referred to the importance of family life. Can you help us a little with what was said about that and why?
Very much what we've covered already, that there was a need, it kept you balanced, it kept you anchored in reality, rather than falling foul to the dangers of being turned, really, I suppose, by the organisation that you went into.
Was anything said to you at that stage about sexual activity undercover?
No.
You tell us that they visited your wife at a time when you weren't present. Is that right?
Yes.
Why did they visit your wife?
I think they wanted to know how she felt about me doing it, and they would have explained to her that the hours were antisocial and that there would be some impact on our private life.
And what did she tell you about that meeting?
Just that, just what I've said.
You then start work in the back office. Did you help with the production of intelligence reports during that period?
That wasn't my role, but I would have helped if it got busy, but it wasn't my role.
And did you become familiar with who was operational at the time and the targets they were infiltrating?
Yes, on a weekly basis I would meet with them.
How useful did you find attending the safe house as preparation for your own deployment?
Extremely useful.
And
It was the main source of information for what I was preparing for.
Can I take it from that you had good access to the undercover officers?
Oh yes, I could have met them at any time. It didn't have to be at those meetings if I'd wanted to.
Did they give you any tips and guidance about what to do if you were arrested?
I can't think specifically. We must have discussed it and we must have touched on it. But the specific, I have in the back of my mind that, firstly, that you shouldn't get arrested for anything serious, but that there would be a process that the office would go through to take care of it, and that would be perhaps talking to the magistrate, or there was a process, but what that was and how it was going to pan out, I didn't know. I think the message was, don't get arrested unless you can really help it.
And were you given any an assistance as to whether to stay in your cover identity or not if arrested?
Initially, you were told stay in your cover identity and inform the office as soon as possible.
Were you given any advice or guidance about committing crimes yourself in your undercover identity?
If it were, to avoid it where possible, but if it were inevitable that something was going to happen, like fly posting, then it should be as minor as possible and you should take the minimum role in it that you could. For example, with fly posting, I used to drive around and the guy with me would do most of the posting. So it was trying to keep us as far away from it as you could without obviously not doing it.
Were you given any advice and guidance about how to deal with activists?
No, not that I can think of.
Was anything said about the possibility of sexual advances being made?
There was a discussion with my colleague who introduced me in the first place, 126, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a discussion with him about the fact that, I think I can mention his name, somebody had been compromised. I thought had been compromised because it had a sexual relationship which had got female activists more interested in him, and the research on that had revealed his death certificate.
It's Richard Clarke.
So they had his story had unfolded because of a relationship with women. Now I know that wasn't the case, but the salutary lesson was, be aware that people, the closer you get to people, the more they want to know about you, and the more they'll dig into your past. So that was how it came up.
Yeah. So your understanding was that Richard Clarke had formed a sexual relationship with an activist.
That was what I was led to believe. He never told me that, and I was a good friend of mine, but he never told me that, but that's what I was led to believe.
And what was your view of that conduct?
Surprised to begin with, quite frankly. I don't know. I'm in two minds about it. I mean, it's something that everybody fears when they go out, is how far do you go with any friendships with the people you're dealing with. It's a very difficult world. You live in a world of lies. And it's not easy to do, and it's not pleasant to do. And one can understand that one could let one's guard slip.
And how could you expand on that? How would that happen?
By becoming too friendly with people. You know, of both sexes, not just sexually, of both sexes. It was very hard. It was one of the problems I had when I first started, in my first flat I had. People kept knocking on my door. It was almost, are you going to come out and play? And it was constant, and you could feel the pressure on you, to the point that I moved away, so that I could keep some sort of distance, because I could already feel, we went to Glastonbury, and you could just see that before you know it, when you're going in long train rides or car journeys, and you start talking, the problem with undercover is, for every lie you tell, you've got to tell 100 more lies. So you try and keep everything as close to the truth as possible, and you try and avoid intimate one-to-one conversations as much as you can, in any shape or form.
Did you discuss these pressures with your fellow undercover officers?
I think we almost all felt that.
Sorry, that wasn't quite the question I was asking.
Oh, sorry.
Did you discuss those pressures with your colleagues? It may be from your answer.
Probably will. Yeah, I'm sort of assuming that that's something we would have talked about, but specific conversations with specific people, I really can't remember. I honestly can't.
And was there any, did any view emerge as to how you dealt with them?
No, I think with SDS, everyone was their own sort of guide, really. You listen to everybody else, and then you set your own course, having listened to everybody else. So there was no instruction book, and no, this is how you do it. This is what you do, this is what you don't do. There were general guidelines. There'd been some talk about a book in the back office that you could refer to, and apparently there were guidelines later on, or an instruction book. In my time, I was told there were things in the back office, a folder that you could look at, and it was literally a loose leaf folder with scraps of paper in it, where people who'd been in SDS put down their recollections and their experiences, and it was sort of, that's going to be a mine of information for you. And quite frankly, I got through the first 3 and didn't bother reading the rest, because it was of no use to me whatsoever. All it did was they talked about the groups they were in, and as I wasn't going in those groups, it wasn't of any relevance to me. I got far more from casual discussions with individual officers, and I talked with all of them at some stage over a period of time, and then gleaned from what they told me and took out what I thought was valuable and dismissed what I didn't think was valuable.
Was there any guidance from the SDS managers about how you dealt with these interpersonal pressures?
I'm not sure I actually ever raised it with them.
Did they proactively raise it with
There was one.
With you?
I can give you a name, or something. He was the D. Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, his cover name. HN 68. HN 68, who was the DI. He had done it, and he was probably the go-to person if I was anything I needed to know about something that I wasn't sure of, that I didn't have in my mind. He's the person I would go to ask, what did you do? What would you do? He was probably the wisest of us.
Okay. But apart from someone you could go to, was there any active guidance coming from management about how to deal with interpersonal pressures?
You were always told, if you've got a problem, come to us. It wasn't a closed door. It was an always open door. I think when you're doing that, half of it is pride would stop you from doing that unless it was something pretty serious. I think you'd feel you'd failed a bit if you needed to go.
I'm getting the sense from your evidence that if each officer was to be his own guide,
Yes.
A lot depends, in terms of propriety, on the moral character of the officer. Is that fair?
Yes.
Was there any discussion about what as a lawyer I would call trespass, but in reality means entering people's private homes whilst an undercover officer?
No.
Was there any discussion about the circumstances in which you might take or copy confidential documents?
No.
Moving away from conversations about how to do the job, what was the atmosphere like at the meetings?
It varied from meeting to meeting. It was to some extent, there was business to be done and there was a social aspect to it as well. Probably about 50-50. It was an opportunity to meet with to actually be yourself.
And did generally people get on? Was there a
Yes.
good social side to it?
Generally, yes. There were a lot of different characters. There wasn't one model.
Sure. And in terms of conversation, was there much banter?
There is throughout the police, unfortunately.
And would that involve talking about women sometimes?
In those days, yes.
And would it involve talk about women in the way that women were talked about in those days?
Let me be clear about this. When we're talking about women, we're not talking about our targets now. We're just talking about women generally.
Yes.
There's plenty of that, yes. But it was kept at that. We didn't really talk very much about our individual groups that we were infiltrating.
Did the atmosphere
I have signed an order to this effect. There will be no disclosure or publication made of the information stated during today's hearing between the times 11:06 and 11:07 on the topic of the name then mentioned. The order does not prohibit disclosure to members of the inquiry team, but it is a strict prohibition on further disclosure beyond this room. Because I know everyone is being kept in the room, I've been asked if I will rise for a short period to permit a natural break. I will, of course, do so. The transcriber will have his break, or has had his break now, and it will continue a little longer. Can I say to you, please don't worry about this. These things do happen. They have happened before. We've dealt with them before, and we will deal with them on this occasion.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. HN 65, we were in Manchester. What were you hoping to get from the visit?
A general understanding of the area, perhaps pick up a few points that I could raise if needed to be, like landmarks or things that were close by. Just anything that would sort of boost or bolster my cover story.
Did you investigate the deceased child's family at all?
No. The address. I got the address from his birth certificate and death certificate, and that's all I went and focused on.
Did you or the office cause any investigations to be carried out by the local special branch?
No, I didn't. Anyway, I don't know whether the office did, but I didn't.
Can I move back now to Richard Clark?
Yes.
And what you were told about his having been confronted with the death certificate of the child whose identity he had adopted. Did that anecdote cause you to be concerned that the same might happen to you?
Absolutely. There was a fear that goes with you all the time of being exposed. So yes, without a shadow of a doubt. So that's something you had to have a story for before it happened, rather than be confronted with it and have to make something up at the time.
And, well, you've anticipated my next question. Did you have a story
Yes,
ready?
I did. Yes, I did.
It
was only temporary.
Was that something that you did of your own volition, or without mentioning any names, was that something that you were advised by somebody else to have prepared?
No, I think it was something I did for myself. I didn't discuss it with the office. I just did it.
Did you or your managers make any preparations regarding the family of the deceased child in the event that the death certificate was produced by the activists you were infiltrating?
Sorry.
Well, you have told us that you had a story prepared. Yes. If you were challenged, but if your cover was blown, was any thought given to the family of the deceased child?
I don't know whether the office might have done. I don't think anything was prepared in advance for that. My preparations were purely to get me through short term, to get me out of the situation I would have been in, and then I would have vanished.
Did you give any consideration to the family in those circumstances?
No, because I really didn't think that it would ever happen.
Moving now to the line that you prepared to avoid romantic commitment. You've told us in your witness statement that you had a backstory that your girlfriend had died and you were not ready for a romantic relationship.
Yes.
What prompted you to develop that line?
I suppose the fear that you're going to become friendly with these people, and you needed something in case, there were approaches from men as well, you needed something to explain why you weren't interested, really.
Did what you'd been told about Richard Clark play any part in your concocting this story?
Yes, I suppose, yes, it did.
Being careful about names, did anyone advise you to prepare this sort of cover?
No, not specifically. 126 was a person who raised it with me first, but it was literally only in conversation. He was just saying, stay away from relationships because they're problems. And he used that as like they were for Rick.
When your legend was tested before you deployed, did you make your managers aware that a girlfriend who died was part of your backstory, and why?
She was fictitious to start with, so I didn't think it was necessary. There was no person involved. It was a figment of my imagination.
That's not what I'm driving at. I'm just driving at, did you tell your managers that you'd done that?
I'm not sure. I don't think I was heavily tested on my background.
I mean, really what I'm driving at is whether your managers wanted to know whether you had this sort of protection or not.
I don't think we discussed it.
Was your legend ever tested by CND, to your knowledge?
No.
Or Carl?
No.
At the end of your deployment, did you return the cover documents that you had?
Yes.
Were you required to do so?
I don't know, I just did. I can't remember that. I was very glad. It was like peeling off a layer of skin. It was quite nice to get rid of everything. So I didn't need any encouragement.
Moving to a different topic, the importance of keeping the existence of the SDS secret. Presumably you knew that that was important.
Yes.
Could you help us, again being careful with names, about how you knew that?
No, it was a view held throughout SDS, through the management, through everybody in the branch, effectively, to the point that I knew before, well, I didn't know what SDS was totally before I joined it. I had an idea, I knew it was undercover and so on, but I didn't know the full relevance of it. But it was something that was kept very secret within our own branch. You didn't tell. There were a lot of guys who were in the branch at the time when I was there who never knew that I did SDS, because that just wasn't something you talked about.
Were you given any instructions about what to do if compromised?
No, I don't think I was.
Did you ever get the sense that it was extremely important that if you were compromised to keep the existence of the SDS secret?
Oh, yes.
Can we move now to your deployment itself? Your early reports are about the campaign against racist laws. Can you help us with how it came to pass that that was a group that you first reported on?
It wasn't the group I first got involved with. When I went out, I was targeted towards the IMG. That didn't exist anymore. It was disintegrating and going in all sorts of directions. I learnt that, but I also came close to another group, a splinter group from them, who were active in the campaign against racist laws. So it was effectively targeting that group who were using the Carl campaign as a tool that took me to the campaign against racist laws meeting. Is that clear?
Yes, it is. Being careful about names,
Yeah.
who was it who directed you to the IMG?
Yeah. That was the chief inspector and the inspector at the time, the one whose name I shouldn't have said. Shall I get his number for you?
You don't need his number, but the
68.
The chief inspector.
68, HN 68, and his chief inspector.
And who was the chief inspector?
Well, I'm not sure whether he's shown down here either. But I don't think he was never undercover, so he's probably not. I can write his name down and then you can decide. Shall I do that?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Please.
He's already given evidence to this hearing, actually.
Thank you. I don't think there's any problem about the name, but Mr. Barker.
No, I didn't think so.
Thank you. Yes, we can use that name.
I daren't do any more without checking.
Very wise. Take that precaution.
DCI Butler. What was management's reaction to the fact that you were reporting on Carl?
They knew that I was only using that to get at the organisation, so they just accepted that. It would be the same as if I was targeting the SWP, and the SWP were running something for the Labour Party.
When you say organisation, are we talking about the League for Socialist Action, or are we talking about something
League for
else?
Socialist Action, yes. That was what I was looking at. I wasn't looking at campaign against racist laws. I was absolutely dumbfounded when a couple of months after I'd been to the meeting that you're talking about there, I noticed a massive demonstration in London, because I just thought it was something that they'd designed and made up just as a recruitment vehicle. So nobody was more surprised than me to find out that it was actually quite a large organisation.
I see. Now, even though you were using Carl as a route into another group, you still filed reports about Carl.
Well, it was a Carl meeting organised by the League for Socialist Action. So that wasn't central Carl. That wasn't. So you're going to ask me, I'd imagine, about secretary or...
Well, we're going to come to a number of the reports.
Yeah.
At this stage, really what I am driving at is, was that accepted SDS practice at the time that you would report on a group in those circumstances?
Yes, if you were targeting a different group, you'd go where they went.
And you would report on them?
Yeah.
So perhaps we can start by looking at some of the reports. So the first one is file 2, tab C7, for the projection is 16568. And if we could start by seeing the date of that report, that's the 1st of April 1981.
Yeah.
And paragraph 2, it says, on Sunday the 29th of March 1981 at 2 p.m. at Brabant Road Community Centre, Station Road, Wood Green, N22, a conference involving all London Labour parties took place to discuss the campaign against racist laws. About 40 people were present. At paragraph 3, says, despite the title of the conference, it can be categorically stated that the conference was organised by and for the benefit of the League for Socialist Action. Yeah. Perhaps I can stop there. Paragraph 2 looks like we've got a report about the London Labour parties. But for what you go on to say in paragraph 3, would you have regarded that as a problem?
I probably didn't think about it at the time. Now you mention it, of course, because we don't report on Labour Party meetings. But it wasn't a Labour Party meeting.
Yeah, and
it was a front meeting.
You're at pains to say that in paragraph 3.
I say that quite clearly in the next paragraph.
And then if you go to paragraph 4, privacy, National Secretary of Carl and a member of the League for Socialist Action addressed the meeting first. He spoke at some length about the necessity of taking the campaign into the Labour movement, laying particular emphasis on the role that the Labour Party could play. That suggests, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that suggests that Carl and with the League for Socialist Action behind them is there some entryism into the Labour Party going on here?
By whom?
Well, you were there, I wasn't. Is somebody trying to enter the Labour Party?
Yeah, League for Socialist Action, absolutely.
And
That's why I stopped reporting on them later.
And can you develop that answer? Why? What was the problem?
Well, the problem was that we don't do entryism into the Labour Party. The branch that's an absolute taboo.
And
The Labour Party is off limits.
Now, was this a decision that you made yourself, or was this a decision you made in discussion with your manager?
Well, I think it's something we're all generally aware of, but I would have gone back and discussed that. In fact, I did go back and discuss that, and it wasn't long after this that it was decided that I could no longer target League for Socialist Action, because a large part of their strategy was entryism into the Labour Party, which would have meant that if I'd stayed with them, I'd have been doing entryism in the Labour Party, which we don't do.
Could we look at paragraph 5 now, please?
Yeah.
The final speaker was John Tilley, MP, who outlined the action taken by the Labour Party to oppose the bill. Following this speech, the floor was invited to put questions to the speakers, and John Tilley was continually attacked by members of the audience for the past record of the Labour Party on racism and the unwillingness of MPs to implement Labour policies on immigration. Despite persistent questioning, he was unable to categorically state that a Labour government would withdraw any Nationality Act passed in the future. He blamed this on the intransigence of civil servants.
Yep.
So you are there at least outlining what a Member of Parliament has said and the response to his speech. What was the reaction of your managers to your doing that?
I honestly, it was not brought up or mentioned. It's walking a tightrope there. I concede that there's an MP and I'm reporting what an MP is saying. But we have always, as far as I'm aware, in our branch, if we go to rallies or meetings and MPs address it, we would put the gist of it in the report. But it wouldn't be a report on the MP, it would be a report on the meeting.
So, would it be fair to say that you were doing what was expected of you?
Yes.
Can we go over the page to paragraph 7, please?
Yep.
Now, I appreciate that you may not personally have topped and tailed this report, but we see at paragraph 7, under the persons identified as present title, John Tilley, and then it just says MP. Is that, as you understood it, the correct way to complete a person's identified where they are a Member of Parliament?
I believe so, and you would find that there was no reference to them.
Thank you.
If there is, then all my assumptions are wrong. But I don't think there'd be a special branch reference, whereas the other names you would have references or no trace or whatever.
There are. Thank you. Could we take that down? Could we have up now, please, from the same files, tab C9, and for the projectionist, 16595. And if we just look at the date and paragraph 1, please. 8th of April 1981, on Sunday the 5th of April 1981 at 1 p.m, a demonstration organised by the Campaign Against Racist Laws, CARL, met at Speaker's Corner, London W1, and marched to Trafalgar Square, WC2. And then if we zoom out a little bit, we see the rest of the report is essentially listing, subject to the privacy redactions we've applied, the people who attended. Can you recall whether there was any management reaction to this report?
No, absolutely not.
Was there anything unlawful about what was said by by the speaker at that demonstration?
I don't recall it, so I can't say.
Would it be fair to say if there had been anything unlawful, you would have noted it?
I would have thought so, yes. I would hope so.
So on the face of it, you are, presumably you attended this meeting, did you, to report on it?
I don't recall it, but that would nobody else from our office, from our place. What I'm concerned about with this report is that there's no normal proviso at the top of it. So I'm wondering whether that is even my report.
It says at the very top there's an SDS stamp. And
but
will
you'd get the following information from a secret and reliable source, and it's not there. And all our reports had that on it.
I mean, we think the source is, because it says SDS at the top, and it's got the Box 500 stamp, we've obtained it from Box 500. This has come from their files as SDS reporting. That's why we think it's yours. Is the likelihood that this is your report?
I said I don't recall the whole thing. I really don't recall it. I just assumed, because it had Carl on it, that it was probably mine. I don't know what comment I made when I saw it, when you showed me the files.
Do you see the difficulty of an undercover police officer reporting on a public meeting at, of all places, Speaker's Corner?
Yeah. If he had.
Did this ring any alarm bells at the time?
Well, as I said, I don't recall writing this report. I certainly don't recall the incident.
Thank you. If we could take that down, moving to the issue that you mentioned a moment ago, there comes a point in time, doesn't there, when you are appointed as temporary secretary to Carl.
Brackets, League for Socialist Action.
And could you help us with what that role involved?
It didn't involve anything because I did nothing. I went from doing that, from being appointed as that, I then went to, there were 3 or 4 members, I don't remember their names or anything, from League for Socialist Action, who were doing a lot of printing at home and so on and so forth. I spent 2 afternoons with them, helping to print and fold leaflets and this, that and the other. And then I never saw them again, because by that time we discussed it in the office and I was not going to be covering campaign against racist laws.
Did you organise any meetings or anything like that?
No.
How did you come to be appointed as temporary secretary?
Well, it was literally, they were looking around and I just didn't look away in time and they caught my eye. And it was, would you mind doing it? And it was, yes, it was as crude as that, quite frankly. I certainly didn't put myself forward.
I mean, you're giving the impression that this was a post you didn't want.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Was there a problem with taking a post such as this?
It was a post I didn't want because that wasn't the target I was aiming for. And I could see myself getting very involved in things I didn't want to get involved in.
Thank you. I think we can move now from Carl to CND because you do pretty rapidly move on from Carl, don't you, and into
I should
CND.
point out before you go to that, I was right from the get-go, I had attended meetings of our local CND from where my Dove flat was. And that was very much testing out my new persona. And it was as simple as that. It was actually when I was establishing my flat, and while I was still doing League for Socialist Action, I saw meetings, CND meetings being held in Hampstead area where I had a bedsit. And I thought, well, that will be a good way to test my background. And literally that's all it was. There was nobody directed me there or anything. I literally just went along to test my background, like joining the local library. And I just went along on 2 or 3 occasions. So I was already just going along to those meetings, and it was purely and simply a good test for my pedigree without any danger being done if I got it wrong or made a slip up or made a mistake.
And did the fact that it might be of some interest to Special Branch influence that decision?
No, not really, not really.
And so if we fast forward a little...
C&D at that stage wasn't of any great interest. The interest of C&D arose primarily during 1981, when, with the imminent arrival of cruise missiles and so on and so forth, from a very small numbers, and you can see it in their own records, their membership just flourished, it just blossomed, because of the antipathy to Americans bringing their weapons and you placing them in our country.
So you're attending, this is the Hampstead branch
Yep.
of CND. You're attending meetings of the Hampstead branch of CND.
Yes,
It's early in your deployment.
yes.
You've come to the realisation that you need to move on from Carl. We know that you end up infiltrating
Yep.
CND.
And there's a reason for that.
Can you explain how you move from Carl to CND?
Yeah, quite easily. Carl, to begin with, was not what I was aiming for. It was League for Socialist Action. League for Socialist Action, within 6 months or so, had... I mean, they were telling me that they were going to do entryism into the Labour Party. So that was something that, at the office, it was right, walk away from it. We can't do that anymore. There was no IMG, so it was, what was I going to do? And one route would have been SWP, but during the time that I went to those meetings of CND at Hampstead, there was somebody brought a leaflet along to one of the meetings about a training weekend for non-violent direct action. Not organised by CND, but a non-violent direct action education weekend. It was run at a school somewhere, and I don't know where, northeast London. And I went along to that, and I wrote a report on it, which I'm not sure I ever found to my satisfaction was the actual report. But I wrote a report on it, and it covered the fact of they were looking at taking what was illegal action in support of campaigns. So I wrote a report on that, and then, I'm not saying that CND organised it because they didn't, but it was through CND that I found out about that, and where their sort of influence was likely to take hold was within CND. Following on from that, in the autumn of 1981, I think it was, and I could be wrong with years, I'm not very good at it's quite a long time ago, it's the mists of time is holding me back here, but in the later part of 1981, there was a massive demonstration in London which surprised everybody, including our branch, and suddenly our whole branch said, crikey, perhaps we should be looking at this, because with the sort of anger that's being displayed, we'll have to be careful that there's not any illegal action taken in support of this campaign. Not by CND, but because of the large numbers from it. So with an NVDA training weekend and that large demonstration, which coincidentally, the Greenham Common campaign started because women who'd come up from Wales went and pitched themselves, I don't know whether before or after, or half and half went up and half had stayed there, or they did it on their way back. But a women's group from South Wales had actually set up a camp outside Greenham Common. And that was, I was discussing with my DCI and saying, this is happening. I told you this NVDA could be a bit of a problem for us. And what we've always said in our branch is, any problem anywhere in the UK, there's always echoes of it in London. So what we were worried about was that you'd have action like Greenham Common Women taking place in London, and we wouldn't have any insight into it, or any foreknowledge or any warning. So I was targeted at looking at the NVDI side of CND. Not C&D itself, the NVDI side. So that's how it evolved. No words with the security service or anything. It evolved just like that.
But if I've understood you correctly, following a very large CND demonstration, discussions with your then DCI, that is seen on the threats that the special branch has to deal with as the next big thing, and therefore you're going to report on it.
Potentially the next big thing, yes.
Now, you give some evidence in your witness statement about the background to CND as you understood it.
Yeah.
You've said in your witness statement that you thought that CND was originally controlled by the Communist Party of Great Britain,
Yes.
and that thereafter it had perhaps in the 70s only been influenced by the CPGB. And you've said that there was concern that a Trotskyist takeover might make it more militant.
Yes.
Where did you get all that information from?
A variety of sources, really. Where do I start on that?
Well, perhaps you could start with when did you get that information?
I gleaned it over a period of time, and it's very hard to put your finger on exactly when each bit arrived in my mind. CND, I would have researched CND if I knew I was going to have more to do with it. And there are a lot of books and a lot of comments by activists of Committee of 100 in the day who talked about it. And I'm sure I've read in the press, I didn't get it from any secret source, that at one stage over half of the leadership of CND in the 60s was communist. And it was acknowledged as something that the Communist Party were very keen to influence, if not control. That was the early days in the 60s, not talking about when I was there.
Were you, when you were conducting this research with a view to paying more attention to CND, discussing it with your managers?
Yes.
And what was their reaction?
He was the one. Trevor had gone, so the next one along, the next chief inspector, was a period.
Are we talking about David Short?
Dave Short, yeah.
Yep.
It was a period when a lot of things were beginning to happen that we'd not seen before, like the animal rights movement, single issue campaigns that were causing lots of problems. Not massive ones, but financial problems, as you see today with Stop the Oil and with Extinction Rebellion. There's millions are spent in policing those things. So you do really need to keep on top of it, otherwise you can waste even more millions. And that, I think, steered Dave Short's thinking. And I don't know who he discussed it with, but he was the one who agreed. We discussed it together. I told him what I knew. I didn't tell him I'm going to do this. He told me, yes, I want you to do that. But we discussed it, and we thought that there would be an echo in London, which there never really was. What we didn't imagine at the time, what we didn't envisage at the time, was how powerful and how influential the Green and Common women's movement was going to be. Which inevitably, after about a year or so, we were saying, well, we actually do need a woman here, because, John Kerry isn't going to get very far with that.
Coming back to CND for the moment, I mean, you said that there was a concern about the non-violent direct action.
Yeah.
That, strictly speaking, isn't the sort of... It's not quite the same as public disorder, is it? And it's not quite what the SDS had been doing in the past. Was there any discussion about that?
I'm just trying to think. Probably the closest to it would have been action by anarchists. I mean, at the time round about that time, there was Stop the City, wasn't there? There was an anarchist. And that they wanted to actually bring CND into it. And CND said no. But you could easily have seen that sympathisers of nuclear disarmament might have felt that it was worthwhile lending some weight and some influence to stop the city, because those were the arms dealers, arms traders, and so on and so forth, that they were trying to stop this whole capitalist organisation that was sort of leading us to wars all the time to their own financial.
So was there a concern that with large numbers of people protesting about an emotive issue that it might get, from the police perspective, hijacked by extremists and cause public order problems?
I think to some extent, yes. I mean, I'm thinking now, I'm not sure whether, I think it was probably just before the poll tax campaign, you know, probably 95% of the people on the poll tax demonstration were perfectly entitled and perfectly normal people. But that was an absolute riot. I'm not saying that a CND demonstration would ever turn to a riot, but there might have been sufficient people on that who said, right, let's go and blockade the whole of the city. Let's blockade the whole of Whitehall and things like that. And that I could have easily seen something like that taking off. But that wouldn't have been CND. Again, it wouldn't have been CND. And this is where people are not getting it, is that while I was in CND and getting a lot of my information through that medium, it wasn't CND that we were pointing the finger at.
What was your understanding about how CND demonstrated at
Very peacefully, very peacefully.
That was, I was about to say, at the outset of employment.
It was almost too pleasant. I mean, I have to say that my colleagues ribbed me about what nice people I was dealing with, because they were nice people. And I really mean that sincerely.
I mean, did that, if that was your perception at the outset, did that continue and endure throughout your deployment?
Yes.
One of the SDS's roles was to assist the security service in its counter-subversion role. Were you told anything about the security service interest in CND?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because I'm not sure how clear my memory is on this. I knew that, well, I can say her name because she's Kathy Massiter was dealing with CND. I knew that. I also knew that as far as she was concerned, she didn't want to hear from me or anything from me, because she had her own sources. To some extent, we had a desk in C Squad as well, and I got the same from them. But which kind of supports what I'm saying is I wasn't out there for CND, I was out there for non-violent direct action, which unfortunately didn't happen, because the closest they got to it was women, and I wasn't a woman.
Can I be clear?
Yeah.
The C Squad desk, are you saying C Squad had a CND desk?
Yep.
Did you understand that your reporting was being sent to the security service?
I assumed that most of it would be. I didn't. What my view is that what I was reporting was for public order as much as possible, and I would have hoped that that wouldn't have needed to, but I had no control over where they went afterwards. But if there was anything that right remotely, if I'd mentioned anything communist or SWP, then I know for sure it would have gone to the security service.
You mention in your witness statement something about some of the diplomatic sensitivities that were arising, I think particularly from Greenham Common.
Yeah.
But you talk about the political and diplomatic consequences of engaging US security personnel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you help us with what those concerns were?
Yeah, I can. Certainly on the diplomatic side, the Americans are very sensitive about their nuclear weapons, obviously. And I've often thought when I see the photos of women dancing on the bunkers at Greenham Common, if there had been nuclear weapons in there, it would have been quite a different story. And my experience of that is having spoken to Americans about a demonstration outside the American embassy way back in 1968, where they had armed Marines behind the door in case anybody broke in, with orders to shoot. And that's what I meant by the diplomatic ramifications of us not being able to ensure that American nuclear weapons were properly protected over here.
Would it be right and fair to break that down into two concerns? One is that the British establishment isn't able to protect the bases from protesters, and that's sort of an embarrassment.
I'm not sure. I think the Americans would have had priority on protecting their bases.
But is it a concern if the British police can't keep order outside the base?
It would have been an embarrassment.
And is the second distinct concern that once protesters are inside an American base, the worst case is somebody starts shooting?
Somebody gets hurt. Yes.
To what extent were these concerns ventilated between you and your managers?
I don't know. I mean, we talked all the time about it. I was constantly pressurised about the need for me and how I should be going, whether it was justified. So yeah, we discussed it on a regular basis, and I think weighing everything up, we thought it was still worthwhile.
Would it be fair to say that these concerns about political and diplomatic consequences then were shared between you and your managers?
Yes.
And were they shared further up the management chain?
I would have thought so, but I don't know for sure.
Was there any mention of the Home Office or the Prime Minister's interest in CND and the Greenham Common women?
No, not to me.
Are you sure?
Yeah, absolutely sure.
Was there a sense that Downing Street wanted to know what the protesters were going to do next?
I didn't know that. That's not why I was doing it either. Because we in the police didn't know, and we wanted to know.
CND had a policy of unilateral nuclear disarmament.
Well, that's debatable.
Could you expand on that?
Well, probably 50-50 when I was there anyway. It was unilateral, multilateral. There were votes on it all the time. It was balanced. It wasn't all unilateral.
Was there a view that the unilateral side of that argument was potentially dangerous?
Within CND? Or...
Well, as to have a mass movement advocating unilateral disarmament, was that regarded as a concern at all?
I don't know. I'm still not sure. Concern from our behalf or from CND's?
From your behalf.
Not really. I suppose we would assess that there'd be more likelihood of finding the wrong sort of people. By that I mean perhaps Trotskyists or communists within the unilateral branch than the multilateral. If we're talking about, if that's the sort of thing you're towards.
Perhaps the easiest question I'm going to ask you all day. CND wasn't trying to overthrow the state, was it?
Not when I was there.
Was it subversive in any way?
No, I don't. I really don't think so. It really was. It was, and a lot of my reporting reflected that. I think that it was becoming too large to be subverted. You had a lot of currents within it, and I don't think they were always as in control of the whole situation as they wanted to be. But no.
Now, if I've understood your evidence correctly, the way in which you come to infiltrate, in particular, the Hampstead branch of CND arises simply from the location of your original cover accommodation.
It was, yeah.
Was any consideration given as to which was the best bit of CND to infiltrate to get what you were after?
Not at that time, because as I said, we weren't intending to infiltrate CND. it sounds a bit crude and it sounds belittling, and I don't mean it like that, but it was almost like joining the local library as well. It was something that I was doing to establish my cover because I was looking elsewhere at the time when I did it. And it was only events that altered that as I went along. It wasn't something I set out from the outset to do.
Can I move to the question of tasking? And I'm meaning that in a sense of your target is now CND, for the reasons you've given evidence about.
Yes.
Tasking within that deployment specific things that people want by way of intelligence. To what extent did your managers ask you to obtain specific pieces of intelligence?
I don't recall any time being asked for that.
We have in the bundle a number of documents from the security service who were meeting your managers. I describe them as shopping lists with questions, sometimes really quite detailed.
They never reached me.
Are you sure about that?
As far as I recall, absolutely sure about it. I also know that Dave Short knew my view about what they were doing and how they, of the attitude that they'd adopted right from the start. And I think he would have been embarrassed to ask me to do it by telling me. He might have said it could be interesting to our branch to have details of who it is so we can check whether there's any potential subversion within it. But he certainly would not have said to me that MI5 wanted to know it, because he'd know what I'd have said.
What was it?
I would have said, I'm not doing it for them.
And why not?
Well, just because I was, bloody minded about it. I didn't think, I was almost, you felt you'd been dismissed. Well, firstly, let's get back to CND. We keep talking about it, but CND wasn't my target. And perhaps that might have meant that I'd have become more and more working against CND, which is not what I was out there to do and not what I wanted to do either, to be quite frank with you.
You've gone a long way to explaining that, but could I just ask you to just expand a little bit further on what was the substance of your concern about passing information about CND to the security service?
I felt, probably, to be frank, dog in the manger. I thought, they've got their own informant, go and ask him or her.
Is this an antipathy towards the security service generally, or is this a concern about the propriety of gathering intelligence about CND?
Bit of both, really, I suppose.
If you were not being given, well, I think you said as part of the answer you might have been asked to gain things for the branch. Can you recall that happening?
National conferences, yes. And I think from our point of view there, and it does come back to public order still, because a lot of the things discussed at national conferences were what sort of action shall we take. There were a lot of motions by Green and Common women. There were other anarchist groups who were putting forward ideas where they're looking to be, let's get more radical as an organisation, which were all dismissed effectively. I mean, CND even kept Green and Common women at arm's length. They supported them thoroughly, but they did keep them at arm's length, I think probably because they knew they couldn't control them either. I don't know where they wanted to, but they knew they couldn't control them.
What I'm ultimately driving at is when you're making decisions about what to put in your reports, to what extent are they informed by what your managers are telling you they want, and to what extent are they informed by you making your own choices?
Probably more by me making my own mind up, actually.
Can we start looking at some of your reporting? I'd like, first of all, to look at the first few reports. I'm focusing in on what you're reporting from the Hampstead branch, from branch level. The first document I'd like to have up, it's File 2, Sir, tab C22, and for the projector, 15474. And if we could have, first of all, the date and paragraph 2, please. 17th of July, 1981. So that's pretty early on in your deployment, isn't it?
Yes.
Wednesday, the 15th of July, 1981, at 8 p.m. at St. Peter's Hall, Belsize Square, NW3, Hampstead C&D Group held a public discussion meeting as a follow-up to a recent showing of the film The War Game. 30 people were present. If we go to paragraph 4, please. The meeting was then open for general discussion, which mainly centred on ways and means of expanding the campaign and making it more effective. It was generally accepted that the turnout for the meeting was excellent, with many new young faces present. Suggestions for future activities included increased pressure on local MPs and Camden Council, both at present sympathetic to CND, street theatre, additional showings of the War Game film with follow-up meetings, and some form of action to protest against the transportation of nuclear fuel and weapons through Camden. So, stopping there, I'm getting the impression that this is a time of growth of CND. The Hampstead branch is doing things like showing a film, recruiting new members, and they're talking about the sorts of campaigning activities that they are contemplating. Is that fair?
Yep.
And there's nothing on the face of paragraph 4 which suggests that anything is going to be either unlawful or a threat to public order.
Well, the last sentence, the end, second half of the last sentence, some form of action to protest against the transportation of nuclear fuel and weapons through Camden. That had potential.
Potential. So the question, the million-dollar question hanging there is what form of action? Will it be NVDA or will it be something entirely lawful?
That would have been what we'd have asked ourselves.
And then below that, at paragraph 5, there are some announcements of future events. There is planned for the 24th of July, outside the Houses of Parliament, participation in the World Disarmament Campaign's vigil, and on the Thursday, the 6th of August, something which was an annual event, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Commemorating Hiroshima Day at the Cherry Tree Memorial. And that is going to be addressed by the Mayor of Camden, Frank Dobson MP, and a number of other people.
Yes.
So again, at that stage, nothing expressly of concern from a policing point of view.
No.
And mention of elected representatives in the form of the Mayor of Camden and Frank Dobson reported as per the special branch way.
Yes.
Why were you reporting, if I use the word anodyne, events like this?
I suppose I'd fallen into the C Squad reporting mode, that when you attend a meeting, you report what's said there. And it's really just putting a heads up, and it's something that we probably wouldn't take any action on, but it was already noted, just noting events that are coming up.
I mean, you've said falling into the C Squad way of doing things. I mean, we've seen a great...
That's what happens. If a C Squad officer had gone to that meeting, that's how he would have reported.
You were doing it the way you'd been taught.
Yep.
Could we go in the same bundle, sir, to tab C29 for the projector? That's 15563. This is a month later, 28th of August 1981. If we start on paragraph 2, On Wednesday, the 19th of August 1981, at 8 p.m, at Privacy, Hampstead CND Group held a committee meeting. 10 people were present. Just stopping there, were these meetings sometimes held at people's private homes?
Always, I think, always.
And could I take it from the fact that you report on these that you had no qualms about going into a private home for these purposes?
Well, I felt uncomfortable about it, so if that's qualms, then I had them. But no, I mean, I felt I was invited in, so it's a hard one. Yeah, if they'd known who I was, they probably wouldn't have invited me in. You're right.
Did you think about it?
I didn't, I think, be honest with you. I didn't think about it.
But I'm sensing a little bit of there was a little bit of discomfort there.
Yes. Right through my whole 4 years, there was discomfort.
Did you ever raise that with your managers?
I think we all talked about it, actually. Some people had less qualms than others, but probably their groups weren't like my group.
If we carry on to paragraph 3, the main topics on the agenda involve future events and recruiting. It was unanimously accepted that recent showings of the film War Game had proved the most successful recruiting instrument when combined with a follow-up meeting. It was decided that the next such meeting should take place on the 7th of October 1981 at Fleet Community Centre, when it could be combined with a mobilising meeting for a national demonstration on the 24th of October. And then if we go down to the next paragraph, we see further events that were discussed: a regular Saturday stall at Swiss Cottage Market, support for the World Disarmament Campaign, which we saw in the last report, a book sale at the Friends Meeting House, necessity for fly posting, etc., prior to the October demonstration, coaches from London Region CND to lobby the Labour Party conference in Brighton. Stopping there for the moment, on the face of that paragraph, the only illegality there is fly posting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everything else is entirely innocuous.
Yes.
And fly posting was, frankly, not why you were there.
Well, what was I thinking about here? Oh, yeah, sorry, yep.
Because it was extreme, and it was extremely common, wasn't it, for protest groups to fly post?
Yes.
It's a very minor offence.
Yes.
Over the page to 6, here it says, many persons at the meeting felt that the time was drawing near when the group would have to offer recruits more than film shows, book sales and meetings. Many newcomers were keen to get involved in some form of direct action in support of the campaign, and providing an outlet for this will be a priority following the October demonstration. If I've understood your evidence to date, this is more what you're interested in.
Yeah, this is exactly, and it's probably at the right time, what I was saying, how events took over, really, and led me more and more down the road of having to look at NVDI, because we really thought it was going to be a major problem in the future.
Can you help us a little bit with the dynamic within the Hampstead group, being careful about people's names for privacy reasons? Was there...
There was an inner core of very, very active activists, a lot of people who drifted in and out of it. It was, I would say, very, very CND-wise middle of the road. We didn't really have any extremists in any way. That's it, really.
So in terms of the branch's attitude to illegality and committing crimes to further a political agenda, where were they?
Well, at a later stage, with Greenham Common going off, there was a lot of sympathy and support for, but a lot of them would probably have felt that they couldn't take it that far themselves personally. And I think that pervaded CND, actually. That's the dilemma CND had as Greenham Common women's influence became more and more.
And was it your experience that the Hampstead branch of CND organised illegal protest activity?
No, didn't.
Could we take that down, please, and go to, so this is file 3, tab C164, file, the projector reference 16955. Moving forward quite a few months now, or in fact more than that, more than a year. This is the 2nd of February 1983. Says the following information has been received from a secret and reliable source. The Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, CND, is incensed at recent press reports that the Conservative Party intends to use the J. Walter Thompson publicity agency to counter their arguments. 3. In an attempt to minimise the effects of this new development, Privacy, a member of Hampstead CND and husband of Privacy, a voluntary worker at CND headquarters, has offered to make contact with a friend who works at the publicity agency with a view to obtaining prior information on any planned publicity campaign. Just to orientate ourselves chronologically, this was in the run-up to the 1983 general election, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And in that election, the Labour Party were led by Michael Foot on a platform of unilateral nuclear disarmament.
Yes.
Was there any concern that you were hearing within Special Branch about the prospects of Michael Foot being elected on that platform?
I don't think so, no.
Were you hearing any concerns filtering through from the security service to the same effect?
No, for the reasons I've said earlier. I think anything that filtered through stopped at Dave Short's desk.
Why did you report about the possibility of a friend of a member of Hampstead CND leaking information from the publicity agency engaged by the Conservative Party?
I don't really know, to be honest with you. I really don't. I can't give you an explanation now for that because I don't know why.
Did you think that it might be useful?
I suppose I probably put that in. I'm just wondering why I put it in, but I probably put that in because it looked like CND was taking on a political stance, one way or the other. And it was something, I suppose, I just needed to flag up. That's all I can think of is why I put it in.
What use did you think might be made of this report?
I don't know. It's like so many reports we put in. You only know how useful they are when they are.
Were you given any feedback about this report?
No.
Do you know what was done with it?
No. Well, I can see here what's done with it in the left-hand paragraph, box 500.
In the sense that you can see it was distributed to
Yes.
the security service from where we obtained it. But that would be through the normal channels of dissemination.
I assume so.
So presumably somebody in C Squad has decided that the security service should see it.
I suppose so, yes. I wouldn't know, but yes, I'd assume so. Yeah, because STS squad wouldn't send it direct.
Looking at it now, this sort of reporting wasn't appropriate, was it?
It's walking on a tight line, I agree, yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't perceive that at the time, but now you point it out in the cold light of day, yes.
Did you ever get a sense that the intelligence that was being gathered might be used for political reasons?
You could ask that question of any report written in Special Branch at any time by any squad. Unfortunately, that's the name of the game with us. So the answer is yes, it might have been, because that's what happens to Special Branch reports.
Could we take that down, please? Those were the reports from branch level that I particularly wanted to ask you about. We're now going to move up to the London region of CND. Before we go to particular reports, can I ask about what was your manager's guidance about the level from which reporting would be welcome?
He approved it. I told him what I was doing, and he approved it. I suppose that's probably all I can say. I think he would have been pleased, because by attending those meetings, if there were to be anything that was of interest to us, you'd have probably heard it first through that medium.
Would it be right to say as a general proposition that the further up the hierarchy you are, the more access you have to strategic decisions?
The earlier you learn of events, I'd say, that's what I'd put it, how I put it.
Okay, and that, in intelligence terms, has a value?
Yes.
Could we now look, please, first of all, at it's file 2, sir, tab C24, 15488. If we could just expand that a little bit, please. This is a report dated the 27th of July, 1981. The following information has been received from a reliable source. As part of a national day of action to commemorate Hiroshima Day, London region of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament have organised a rally to take place at Jubilee Gardens, County Hall, London on Thursday, the 6th of August 1981 from 5:30 p.m. The rally will include live music, speakers, the planting of a cherry tree and the launching of lantern boats on the Thames. The Greater London Council, as part of their support for CND, have offered the facilities of County Hall to the organisers. It is expected that support will be forthcoming from all London CND groups. So this, of course, is, we're back to the normal annual Hiroshima Day commemorations. All of the things here that are being planned are entirely lawful and innocuous, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And as you have reported, this is an event which is being organised with support from the Greater London Council. Did the fact that you found yourself reporting on entirely legitimate protest actions supported by a democratically elected council ring any alarm bells?
No, to be perfectly honest with you. It's as important. It's one thing that you learn quite early in special branch careers, that it's just as important to know when something isn't going to happen as when something is going to happen. So it would have been of value that I was pointing out it is going to be a very much a structured, very much a lawful and peaceful event.
That argument one might see in relation to a group which has a propensity for organising unruly protests, that sort of thing. But doesn't that argument run into difficulties when one is dealing with CND, which organises orderly, lawful protests?
In the long term, if that's all that was happening and there was nothing else and there was no other circumstances around it, yeah, I would agree with you.
And would it be right to say, no, management, come back for your having reported this?
They probably laughed and thought it was a pretty sad report, actually. When I look at it, I would feel the same way.
But it was what was expected of you as a special branch officer.
It was just that's what you did. You know, you wanted to know as much what wasn't going to happen, or that it was going to be aware of it, to be appraised of an event, to know exactly how it was going to be set up. And yes, you're right, they probably, I'm not sure they would even have to discuss that with the police because they weren't doing anything. But if London Region had been asked to send their groups, then perhaps there might be more people coming than you'd anticipated. So it was a, don't worry, guys, we know all about it. This hasn't blossomed into something bigger because something wrong is going to happen. So that would how I would have explained it to myself. But yes, it's probably being overcautious.
But coming back to the genesis of your deployment into CND and the concern with NVDA,
Yep.
You certainly do not restrict your reporting on CND to just NVDA,
No, I
do you?
don't. No.
Once you're in, you report in the special branch way.
Yeah.
Could you take that down, please, and go to tab C60, sir? That's 17072, please. This is a report dated the 8th of January 1982. And if we go to paragraph 2, at the December 1981 meeting of London Region of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, the following 5 delegates were elected to the National Council. We've rejected their names for privacy, but the 5 names were recorded there. This is one of a number of reports in which you report the outcome of various elections within CND. Did you understand there to be an appetite for that sort of thing?
I think there was an appetite for identifying whether amongst candidates that I reported had become members, whether any of them might have ulterior motives.
And was that done in a 2-stage process? First of all, ascertain who had been elected to which posts.
I would not have searched those names. That would have been put in, those are the delegates, you do with it what you want. So they would have searched it in Special Branch and then taken their own decision later on as to what happened to the report.
But so far as your role is concerned, your role is to report
Putting forward the names.
who's been elected,
Yes.
and you leave it to others to
Yes.
then research them.
Yes.
And did you get feedback for this?
No.
No, but it was definitely what was expected
Very
of
little
you.
fee. Yes, it was expected.
Did you ever get requests? Did you get requests to
Not
report?
that I can recall, no.
Could we now look at tab 153, please? That's in file 3, so 15834. Well, this is a report dated the 27th of October 1982, and if we could have paragraph 2 expanded, please. London region of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, LRCND, has prepared plans for a campaign at the next general election. In order to provide more information about the campaign, the following decisions have been taken. 1, a pilot campaign will be launched for one weekend in February 1983 and will involve petitioning and door-to-door canvassing in the Prime Minister's constituency of Finchley. A general election fund will be set up. An election pledge will be taken by people who would be prepared to take a week off work to campaign prior to the election. So this report is directly concerned with London Region's plans to advance CND's campaigning in the next general election.
Yes.
Did reporting that cause you any concern?
I don't think so. I think that certainly the first point 1, the protection team for the Prime Minister would very much like to be aware of that. Because, you know, if they're met with people, they don't know why they're opposing the Prime Minister if she's doing electioneering. I'm finding it hard to explain this. Perhaps I'll try and explain it a bit. The protection needs to be aware, protection team need to be aware of anything out of the ordinary that might be happening around the Prime Minister, her protection team. And this extends actually beyond her protection team because it probably could extend to other ministers as well. And that's something that we should be aware of as a branch, mainly on the protection side now, before it happens. They would not have been very happy if I'd known about this and suddenly in the middle of something sensitive where they're protecting her, suddenly there's a group of people turn up and wave banners in her face and everything. You know, it's not saying we're trying to stop them, but it's just saying if you're aware of it, then forewarned is forearmed. So it was put in with that in mind. If that's gone too far, then mea culpa.
Well, the starting point, isn't it, that campaign groups have a right to campaign, don't they?
Yes, of course they do.
Free expression.
Absolutely.
And there's no suggestion that all campaigning organisations should be spied upon in order to work out who's canvassing where and when.
No, and if I had been put out just to do reports like this, then I could actually say I wouldn't have done the job in the first place. And that wasn't why I was in the role I was in. But it was something that I came across in that role, and it's why I reported on it.
And these are nice people, not the sort of people who are going to...
Not everybody in CND is nice people.
But people petitioning and canvassing door to door are not a threat to the safety of the Prime Minister, are they?
Yeah. Well, what do you want me to say? There are MPs have things thrown over them, don't they? I mean, that beforehand would have been, they have a right to be there and to protest. All I'm saying is that by putting this report in here, it gives the protection team a heads up.
Did this report evince any reaction one way or the other?
No, not as far as I know.
And is the reality that reporting on this sort of political campaigning is something that really shouldn't have happened?
I would defend what I did for, if I'd heard that through any other means, I would have defended making the protection team aware of it. So I can't say, yes, you're right on that.
Can we take that down, please, and go to tab 201, sir, which is right at the very end of the same file, 19111. If we could just have the, thank you. 13th of May 1983, paragraph 2, London Region CND adopted at its annual conference the following resolution. Bearing in mind the important part disaffection among the military encouraged by civilians played in ending the Vietnam War, recognising that support for nuclear disarmament has developed in the armed forces of other European countries, aware from news items and letters to the press that there are members of the armed forces in Britain who believe in unilateral nuclear disarmament, this conference resolves to try to build CND and encourage the setting up of workplace groups in that industry most directly involved in nuclear war preparation in Britain, the armed forces. And if we could go now to paragraph 3, please. The resolution was the brainchild of Pat Arrowsmith, Vice Chairperson of London Region CND, who is well known for her obsession with its content. She, together with the Armed Forces Working Group of London Region CND, believes that the resolution stops just short of incitement to disaffection, although she makes it abundantly clear that that is its objective. Through sheer perseverance, she has recently secured the adoption of this resolution as one of the 2 which London Region CND are permitted to submit to CND National Conference in December 1983. Have I understood this correctly? You are reporting on Pat Arrowsmith's attempts to navigate through CND's processes a resolution which she ultimately wants to be passed at national level. And at this stage, she's got it through the London region level.
Yeah, but that's not the whole story. There's more than a hint of incitement to disaffection here.
I'll come to that. And your understanding, incitement to disaffection is a criminal offence.
Yeah.
And Pat Arrowsmith had, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, a brush with the law on this score before.
I don't know her full history, but I know she had quite a few brushes. So, yes, probably.
And so she's being very careful to stay on the right side of the line.
To appear to stay on the right side of the line.
Do you know, I mean, this is, you report on it further down the line as well. Do you know what happened to this reporting?
No. What, the report?
Do you know whether anything was done with the substance?
I don't know. I can't remember.
And it's right, isn't it, that Pat Arrowsmith was not prosecuted?
Oh, no, she wouldn't have been that. Otherwise, I would have known that if she had.
Could we now move to the London Region CND Executive Committee and Council? These are 2 separate bodies, aren't they? There's the committee, and then is it the council, and then the committee is elected from them, or the other way around? Well, let's have a look at the documents. We'll see. Can we start with tab 19, sir? 15408. Again, as an opening question, was there an appetite for reporting on the Executive Committee and Council of the London Region?
I suppose, yes, we wanted to know what was going on in London, yes, so yes. It would.
So if we take this early example, This is a report dated the 23rd of June 1981. And if we look at paragraphs 2 and 3 first, please. On Wednesday, the 17th of June 1981 at 7:30, King's Arms Public House, Northington Street, WC1, the Executive Committee of the London region of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament held its regular monthly meeting. The meeting was chaired by Duncan Rees and 30 people were present. Following the report of the Treasurer and Secretary, Sandra McGowan, organiser, reported that local health authorities had recently been given vast sums of money by the Home Office to set up nuclear war planning offices. She suggested that London groups should protest at their local community health council meetings, which were open to the public. This proposal was favourably received. If we could have paragraph 4 now, please. Other matters of interest to arise from the meeting were: 1. Privacy announced that the Nagasaki Day Rock Festival had been cancelled due to the intransigence of GLC officials. He proposed that 2 smaller events should be arranged in October 1981 and March 1982, leading to a full festival on Nagasaki Day 1982. This was carried by the meeting. A working committee was set up to arrange a trade union conference on CND for early February 1982. Exactly what the conference would discuss had yet to be decided. Following the decision by Greater London Council to declare London a nuclear-free zone, arrangements for a London-based petition on this subject were placed in abeyance. The meeting closed at 10:30 p.m. Now, there's nothing in that report which is of public order concern, is there? And plainly nothing subversive.
No.
Why were you reporting the essential day-to-day running of this committee?
I think that's SB practice kicking in again, that if you go to a meeting, you report on it.
And was there a feeling that that it was important to know what was going on at this higher level of the organisation?
Helpful to know.
We could go to other examples, because you reported frequently, didn't you, on the committee and the council?
Yes.
Including elections to
Yes.
the officers there and so forth. Perhaps we could take that down and go to a specific example, which is file 4 C222, sir, 19393. This is a report dated the 12th of August 1983. And if we could look at paragraphs 2 and 3, please. As previously reported, the London Region CND Council had asked for clarification from the organisers of the Stop the City event planned to take place on the 29th of September 1983, before deciding whether to support it. Accordingly, 3 of the organisers, Dave Morris, Privacy and Privacy, attended the council meeting of London Region CND on Sunday the 7th of August 1983. They explained that they had come from a planning meeting for the event, which had been attended by 70 representatives from peace organisations throughout the country. They explained that a decision had been taken at a previous planning meeting that the demonstration is intended to be peaceful with no violence against people or other animals. When pressed on the word intended, they were unable to deny that some elements in the planning group were prepared to accept limited violence against the police should arrests be attempted. In their defence, they stated that the event was being planned as a carnival with street theatre in an attempt to avoid confrontation. If we then perhaps skip to paragraph 5, the general impression gained by London Region C&D Council was that the event is ill-organised with little chance of success. Serious doubts were expressed that lack of prior consultation with police would lead to confrontation and probably violence. The potential damage to the public, and it's very difficult to read here, something non-violent direct action, NVDA, also featured, I think it says high on the list of criticisms. LRCND council members, something that their organisation should support the event. The simple principle that no initiative for peace should be rejected were defeated in the vote by 13 votes to 9. So, have I understood this report correctly? It's Dave Morris and his associates making their pitch for the support of the London region of CND for the Stop the City campaign, and being rejected because of the risk of violence. And does that reflect the general caution by CND as an institution to avoid disorderly events?
Yes, but what I would point out is it was defeated by 13 votes to 9. So there was a rump within CND who were perfectly interested in joining non-violent direct action events.
But you are
a
not...
minority, definitely, but it was quite a large minority. And that again shows the purpose of why I was there, because you were seeing there that there was, well, no, that just forget that's.
Is that in this particular instance overstating it a little bit? Because I see you're smiling.
Well, I say 13 votes to 9. I was very pleased to see those figures there. Actually, it made my argument a little easier, because as I was saying, there was a big debate going on within CND. There was a massive debate about Green and women, far more than there was about this, and to imagine that they all wanted just plain peaceful protests without any form of serious direct action is not a true reflection of what was going on at the time.
But would it be fair to say this was not the sort of non-violent direct action that CND went in?
This might have gone beyond, yes.
More fence cutting and sitting down and that sort of thing, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Blockades, a lot of blockades. There was talk about actually closing down cruise missiles when they were taken out, attacking the convoys. So, yeah, if you call that peaceful and quiet, fine.
So, would this be a convenient time for lunch?
Yes, it would. At some stage, not now, but at some stage later, I want to return to the topic of how it was that you came to be deployed into CND once the Carl had ended.
Right.
But I'll do that later. Right. Very well. We'll resume. I suppose everybody wants an hour for lunch, and that means I think we must therefore resume at 2:05.